This podcast is intended for mature audiences and could be triggering to some. Please use discretion when listening. An extra trigger warning for today's episode might contain graphic details which may cause disturbances to some. According to Lundy Bancroft, and I quote, "One of the obstacles to recognizing chronic mistreat in relationships is that most abusive men simply don't seem like abusers. They have many good qualities, including times of kindness, warmth, and humor, especially in the early period of a relationship. An abuser's friend may think the world of him. He may have a successful work life and have no problems with drugs or alcohol. He may simply not fit anyone's image of a cruel and intimidating person. So when a woman feels her relationship spinning out of control, it is unlikely to occur to her that her partner is an abuser." Hello, I'm Sonali and welcome back to another episode of Dancing in the Dark. You're listening to my story where I'm sharing my experiences and struggles with domestic violence and the impacts of those abuses. My ex-husband was a loner. I was surprised as he did not have any social circle. However, he had a very different personality in public as opposed to that in private. He was rude, blunt, and egoistic when alone with me, but as soon as he stepped out of the house, his persona used to change drastically. He was this soft-spoken, polite, patient person who seemed so smart and intelligent. In the start, I used to feel a sense of pride as to how other people were respecting him for his views and ideas and sense of responsibilities. But slowly and gradually I was convinced that this was just a charade that he puts up. Half of the time, he didn't even know what he was talking about. However, he was very well read and street smart. And he was very good at it. Even my family was convinced that I was married to such a humble and soft-spoken gentleman. But sometimes his office subordinates complained of him being extremely angry with them. They were used to him yelling on top of his voices every now and then. He used to throw his authoritative weight on everyone around, and this was perceived as a sense of ownership, and people did obey him and his wishes. As soon as he entered home, his transformation from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde was quick and smooth. One could immediately see him changing from a kind, intelligent, and smart person to the world to this cruel, mean, unkind, and controlling person at home. Sadly enough, I often excused his behavior as his workload or responsibility pressure or anger issues, or sometimes just for the sake of a wife's duty. But I never pointed his behavior being abusive. And how can I? Those things only existed in movies and TV serials, not in real life for me, and definitely not in marriages around me. He often remarked of being too consumed in work and had no time for friends. On the other hand, I had a huge circle of friends, most of whom were married, some with kids. I was still in close touch with all my school friends, college ones, masters, and my work friends, but he always hated it when I chatted with them. Gradually, I stopped talking and disconnecting myself with a lot of friends, especially the male ones, who according to him was a restricted zone for a married woman. And for my female friends, he often complained that they were contaminating my mind, and so he never liked me talking to them either. I never demanded even a cutlery from him during our entire marriage, and he still accused me of being a spoilt brat. It was not long enough when I too began isolating myself with my family and close friends. Till this time, he has now bought a new mobile handset to use, whose unique characteristic was call and message recordings. He needed that kind of handset to use for work, and so he got one for me too. He created an account and logged in with his password, making my phone completely visible to him. Now at any moment of time, he could see who I am messaging to and listen to all my call records just with a click of a button. Even if I delete them on my handset, he could still see it at his end from the cloud storage. Research suggests that one of the very first few things a person with an abusive mentality does is isolating victims, making them vulnerable and ultimately numb, sucking out happiness from them and creeping loneliness which just makes them fragile. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. Sometimes it takes a family to break a victim's spirit. When an abuser constantly finds ways to harass their target, victims often are confused about what exactly is playing in their lives. I was no different. Never in my life had I ever imagined a marriage like this, and I was still puzzled and confused with a lot of things going around me. Firstly, the family promised false things to us before marriage. I had to work really hard to meet the financial constraints, but even then I was not given the freedom to use my own money. The money my parents sometimes sent for me as a token of love was taken away by my mother-in-law, and it left me feeling restricted in a lot of ways. Secondly, I was now spending nights finalizing paperwork for the permanent resident application of Canada. I was just married, and now suddenly this plan of moving abroad was a huge change for me. I was still calculating all this, that the constant fear of an extramarital affair with Dhruti was haunting me day in and day out. And to top it all, he was not the kind of a husband who I can talk to, share my thoughts, or even question anything. And the constant traveling took a toll on me and my health. I didn't know where I belonged, and days were passing by with so much happening and things changing with a blink of a second. And so does his mood, that I didn't really had time to have an actual realization. Now the intensity to start the immigration process is increasing with every day. But on the other hand, he was still not preparing for his IELTS exams at all. I did raise the issue a couple of times, as he used to pressurize me for all the paperwork or finding immigration agents almost on a daily basis, but he was not scheduling his exams. Finally, he told me that he had no intention of giving the exam yet, as he was way too busy with his work, but for the time being was submitting the Canadian permanent residency profile on my credentials. He was still maintaining this to be just a dry run, and no plans of actual immigrating was finalized. He convinced me that immigrating to a different country is a huge decision, and he, being the only son, has responsibilities and cannot just leave his job and parents behind. It seemed so legit at that time, and I was sure this was just something he really wants to try once in a lifetime. Something he might have been motivated by seeing other colleagues and hence must have wanted to attempt. Even when we met a few immigration agents, he seemed so curious, as if he was trying to learn about the different processes of immigration for the very first time. I was convinced. Back at my in-laws, a different drama always knocked the door. My sister-in-law, along with her husband and toddler son, used to live in Dubai, but often visited India. Dubai law does not allow termination of pregnancy for anyone and is considered a criminal offense. My sister-in-law visited twice for the same and a few more times for leisure purposes. During her stay, despite my repeated show of discomfort, I was asked to accompany her not only to her doctor's appointments, but also forced to look at the sonography monitor to ensure sterilization was completed. She used to repeatedly tell me how lucky I am that her brother accepted me despite hundreds of girls wooing him in the college. I had to stay at my in-laws and work from home during her stay and take care of her after the procedures. Despite working for 17 to 18 hours, including office work, no one seemed to be happy with me. As the house was small and my bedroom was given to them, I was asked to sleep on the sofa, which was very uncomfortable for me. But it seemed like no one actually cared about the amount of work I was asked to do all by myself for these 6 people. I was treated as nothing more than a house help, but was regularly reminded of my duties as a daughter-in-law. I was assured that everything I do is what a good daughter-in-law is supposed to do. That's what will define my karma, and this is how I will collect good deeds. There was no place for complaint in a marriage. On one such occasion, when some of them were sitting on the dining table to have tea, I was trying to finish my office work. I felt something cold running from my feet towards my knee. For a second I assumed it to be a mosquito or a bug, and in an instant I snapped my leg. But then again I felt the same thing. It was a weird feeling, and I thought my sister-in-law's son must be playing under the table. The third time it happened, this was slower than before and with a different pressure. I looked under the table mat and chills started filling my body. I took the laptop and rushed to my bathroom. It was now filled with my sister-in-law's soiled clothes and her toiletries. I made some space in that small bathroom and sat on the floor, still processing what had happened. My sister-in-law's husband, who was sitting across the table, was giving me a malicious grin, sipping his tea, and still attempting to reach my legs. Am I overthinking, or am I too stressed? Have I started imagining things now? He is supposedly the most sorted person in this zoo of 6 people. I don't think he was up to anything. I'm just losing my mind with so much work and no break. Thoughts came flooding in and I was puzzled all along. Everything after that seemed so normal that I convinced myself of this to be just a joke and me overthinking the same. 2 days later, while serving tea, it happened again. But this time I looked straight in his eyes and gave a sharp look saying, "Excuse me?" He grinned again and said, "I know what's wrong between you guys, but it's okay. What your husband cannot give, I can. You can always come to me." 26 years of training from an entire culture on how to be a good daughter-in-law, and yet no one ever taught me how to deal with family members as perverted as him. I was disgusted to my nerve and didn't know how my husband would react. He might go and have a physical fight with this nasty guy. Despite his anger issues, I believed he would do anything to save my dignity. Next day, I mustered courage and told the incident to my husband, fearing his anger for his brother-in-law. I had planned an entire scenario as to how I will tell him, as well as how would I calm him down so that he does not harm his brother-in-law. No husband will ever tolerate such things, and I knew this could be catastrophic for him. Very carefully, I narrated this incident, and I could see anger on his face growing with every minute. I started calming him down by saying, "Listen, he's your sister's husband. Whatever you do, you have to be careful about it. Talk to him in private. There's a child involved, and you have to think practically," and so on, when he suddenly grabbed me with both hands and leaned forward. I thought he was trying to hug me in an attempt to console me. Instead, he muttered in my ears, "Sonali, you have lost your mind completely. How dare you speak such nonsense? You really think I'll trust someone like you who I have known only for months and not that man sitting outside? He must be joking with you, but he doesn't know that you don't deserve it. You are not that kind of a person people can talk to. You just make issues blow out of proportion. You are disgusting, but if you hurt a single person in this family, then you will see what exactly can I do." And he left the room. He really thought I could make something like this? He did not believe me. I was surprised and hurt at the same time. We girls leave everything behind just to walk beside the man of our dream for our entire life. And my man does not believe me? He did not even give me a benefit of doubt? Tears rolled down again, and I gathered the courage to wipe them off and resume my work in the kitchen. They left after a few days, but this incident did stuck with me. and more the fact that my own husband did not even once considered trusting me. At this point, I didn't know who I was feeling more sorry for. My sister-in-law, my husband, this family, or myself who was trapped in this maze of life. My mother-in-law and father-in-law were always grumpy about anything I did. At least once a day she would remind me how useless I am and how my parents have not taught me anything. I was not allowed to object or even show my disapproval. But one day, I was tired of listening to her constant nagging, and I retaliated. My husband was still at work and I was cooking in the kitchen for my in-laws. My mother-in-law was constantly complaining and saying mean things to my parents. She spoke something very derogatory for my mother that day and mocked how cunningly my parents have just transferred their burden, me, on their heads. The daughter in me could not take it that day, and I walked straight out of the kitchen and told her, "Please don't speak anything about my parents. They do more than they are capable of and meet your demands more than they should. Why would you speak this way for my own parents?" Till that day, I have only seen my father-in-law showing his anger differently, but never speaking directly in an abusive tone to me. For the first time, I saw him screaming on me and accusing me of everything he could. He said, "My parents have married me off, and now I should not be still attached to my parents as I now belong to my in-laws. Even if they say anything, I have no right to take any offense as I am a married girl now." My mother-in-law acted as if she wanted things to cool down between us. I have never spoken back to my own father in my entire life, despite so many times we were on crossroads. So I knew I cannot speak back to my father-in-law as well. I stood there just crying inconsolably, and after 5 minutes my mother-in-law took me back to the kitchen. She asked me not to get hurt from my father-in-law's words, as he is elder to me and has all the rights to scold me if I am wrong. Also, I should not have heard their conversations and defended my parents as they are no one to me now. My parents have married me off and now their problem is over. I should have all loyalty to my in-laws' family, and that should be the only way of living for me. I don't think I was even acknowledging the fact that I was repeatedly called a problem, a burden, a liability, as if being a girl is the biggest mistake of my life. She calmly offered me to make rotis, Indian flatbreads, that day as I was continuously crying. I started rolling each rotis with half heart, and she started baking and then puffing each of them using a tong. Nearing the end of our work, I suddenly felt a burning sensation on my right arm. The hot tong used to make almost 15 flatbreads was now sitting on my right hand, burning my skin under. I went numb for a second and started shivering in pain. The sensation from the burn filled my entire body, making me breathless, restless, and the shooting pain entirely took over me. My mother-in-law acted as if it was just a mistake and suggested I should apply some ice on the same. I was shocked to disbelief when she finally said, "God has punished you, Sonali, because you spoke back to us. See, we are your parents. We are like God to you, and because you disrespected us today, God punished you." Leaving me alone in the kitchen unattended, she took 2 plates of food, walked out of the kitchen, and they started enjoying dinner, watching a TV soap. This was a woman who claimed herself to be my mother, but eventually burnt me with a pair of tongs, just like a monster. Though the pain from that wound no longer troubles me today, but the scar of that assault is embossed in my soul forever. what was given to me as a punishment of a crime I did not even commit. Today is a mark of my bravery and my courage. For days, the ugly mark of the crumpled skin brought tears of helplessness and hopelessness in my eyes. And now, that faint scar on my arm sits as a witness of my survival journey. Come back to know the next chapter as we uncover more layers from this twisted plot. Dancing in the Dark is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Sonali, in an attempt to empower and support victims of gender-based violence, domestic abuse, and intimate partner assaults. Thank you for listening.